And until then, I sort of didn't really think about organ donation all that much, but having spoken to these people who were all mostly on transplant waiting lists, it became something that I thought about more. And I sort of just put it out of my mind because I thought, oh, well, I think it's against halacha, it's something that's important, but it's not something that we do. And then about 6 months into my job, I went on holidays, and when I came back, 2 of the patients had died. Well, they were not because I wasn't there, but they were waiting for lungs that unfortunately just didn't arrive in time. And it just became something that I was interested in. Then again, a few years ago, I started researching it, and I came across Robby Berman's name and the Halachic Organ Donor Society website, and I started looking into it. And I was really amazed that there were so many well-known rabbis and Torah scholars and doctors who are members of the Halachic Organ Donor Society. And even though I was sort of like, oh, I'm going to give myself a 9 haba if I join up, I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. And I did. And then the Midrashet committee, they approached me and asked if I would like to suggest a speaker, and I was like straight away, yes, Robby Berman, that would be great. Robby is the founder and director of the Halachic Organ Donor Society. He is a graduate of Harvard, Yeshivat HaKotel, a few other institutions. Has been very widely published on this topic. And I'm very happy that he could come and speak to us. So, Robby, I'll go to you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Schwab family and the Schachter family and the community for inviting me. I honestly don't know how well this is going to go over because I'm an American and I haven't been to Switzerland in 20 years. And I don't think our senses of humor are exactly the same. I mean, this morning I took a walk, I love chocolate, and I went to this store called Sprogli or Spriggly. I went to the one with the hechsher, you know, it's on the Unaplastus Glasa, that one has a hechsher. And I went there, and I love chocolate, so I asked for the day truffle and the white chocolate truffle and the milk chocolate truffle, and I ordered I'm not kidding you, 25 truffles. And when she was ringing me up, she said, do you want anything else with that? And I said, yeah, I'll have a shot of insulin. And she said, what's that? I said, that was a joke. And she said, what do you mean? I said, a joke, something that Jews made up in New York 100 years ago. And she said, oh, yeah, a joke. So I don't know if this is going to go over well, but I lecture this evening about brain death. And to lecture about death can be a very depressing thing. So I try to make it as entertaining as I possibly can so it doesn't get depressing, okay? So please forgive me if I seem flip about some of the topics that I will be discussing, but I want to make it a little bit light. I'm doing a series of lectures. I'm lecturing tonight about the brain death controversy. I'm giving Devar Torah Friday night. Then Shabbat morning, I'm lecturing about organ donation in general and what's going on in Israel. And then on Saturday nights, I'm doing another something. And then Sunday, I'm actually not lecturing, I'm actually going to be hosting and facilitating an audience debate about the ethics of buying kidneys from poor people. A very fascinating, controversial debate. Okay. How much time do we have? It's now
Shavachetzi,
an hour and a half. So I figured I'd give a 5-minute opening, then have a 50-minute break, and then wrap it up with a 5-minute closure. Does that sound good? Okay, great. All right. To frame the question this evening, we can all appreciate that if a person believes, if you're a rabbi or a doctor, and you believe that a person who's brain dead is not really dead, you will not allow the family to donate organs. Can we all appreciate that? Why would that be? Supposed people not participate in... Why would that? Because exactly, you'd be killing the person. But if you're a rabbi or a physician that thinks that a brain dead person is dead, then in general, and we'll talk about some of the other issues on Shabbat morning, but in general, yes, you would allow for the organ donation, and you can save 8 lives. So what does Halacha say about brain death? Well, the problem is, as an introduction, you should all know how to spell my name. My name is Robby Berman, and it's spelled R-O-B-B-Y. It is not spelled R-A-B-B-I. If you have one of them in the building. Anyone here a rabbi? Raise your hand if you're a rabbi. Any rabbis in the room? Any doctors in the room?
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you're a physician. 1, 2, 3. Are you in medical school? Okay. Okay. Unfortunately, so I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a physician. But I have been spending the past 17 years of my life reading, researching, discussing, and writing only about brain death from both a medical and a halachic perspective. Unfortunately, too many people watch ER, Grey's Anatomy, and House, where you're very confused about what brain death is. How many people here think, by the way, I look at the guy from House? Anyone think the House, Dr. House? You think so? Yeah. So I just lectured in Beijing in China. And it seems that at least every third person watches House, because as I walk down the street, every third person went, House? House? It seems, I don't think I look like the guy, but evidently. So I'm not a physician. But what I want to do with you is share with you what brain death is. Because I have met, by the way, many physicians who do not understand what brain death is. If they're a neurologist or an ICU, intensive care individual, they understand brain death. But I've met cardiologists that don't fully understand brain death, and physicians from the whole spectrum. So I ask you to bear with me, and I also ask a little bit of latitude from the physicians, because my goal here tonight, am I speaking too quickly? Yes. I'm a Jew from New York. Yes? Slow it down? Slow it down.
Because it's difficult for us.
I understand.
Doesn't matter because of the language.
It's what?
He's saying another language.
He's saying another, okay. All
All
right. So I will try to slow it down.
Not that much.
I'm a Jew from New York. It's very hard to slow it down. Okay. I see. I can't even think at a slow level. That's the problem. I can't think at a slow level. What was I saying? I don't even know what I was saying. Oh, brain death. Okay. So I just want a little bit of latitude from the physicians, because my goal here tonight is not to complicate things. We can always make things more complicated. I never like it when I hear a rabbi give a shiur and he brings in every rishon and every achron, so you walk out of there saying, yeah, he's very learned, but I have no idea what he said. I'm not interested here in explaining to you what every part of the brain does to show you how smart I am. I want to try to explain to you what brain death is and why there is a controversy about that in halacha. In order to do that, I need to first give you like a very quick anatomy lesson and explain to you what brain death is from a medical perspective, and then we'll delve into the halachic perspective. The brain consists mainly of two parts. The smaller part of the brain, which we call the brain stem, it's really the top of the spinal cord. It sits at the nape of the neck. It has 12 functions. The most important function of the brain stem is this.
Breathing.
And on top of the brain stem is a larger part of the brain called the cortex. That's the end of the anatomy lesson. Please take out your number 2 pencils and let's begin our little exam. What's a larger part of the brain called?
Cortex.
Cortex. Smaller part? Brain stem. What's really the top of?
Spine.
Spinal cord. How many functions does it have? Most important function is? Excellent. Everyone gets a star at the end when you walk out. You get a star. If your cortex is not working, you're in a coma, which means that you can lie in a bed, you can breathe on your own. If they give you nutrients and water, and electrolytes, you can stay there for years. You're in a coma. Are you dead if you're in a coma?
No.
No. Sometimes people, what? Wake up from a coma. If you're in a coma for a very long period of time, modern medicine calls a very long period of time 30 days. If you're in a coma for more than 30 days, modern medicine says you're no longer comatose, you're now in a vegetative state, a PVS, persistent vegetative state. Coma and PVS mean the same thing. One is short-term, one's long-term. So if you're not dead in coma, you're not dead in PVS. One is short-term, one's long-term. Okay. Brain death is a quantitatively different animal. Brain death means the following. Cortex is dead. Brainstem is dead. The whole brain is dead. Really? How is that possible? Why would you have a person in a hospital whose whole brain is dead? We know that the brainstem controls what? Breathing. So he's not getting oxygen. His heart should stop beating. So if his brain is dead and his heart is dead, we should bury the person. How is it possible there are people who are in the hospital and their heart still beats.
Artificial means.
Artificial means, they're on a machine. What's that machine called?
Life support.
Life support. What else do they call that machine?
Respiratory.
A ventilator. They call it a respirator. Well, which is it? We have 3 words. What's the most accurate term for this machine? A ventilator, a respirator, or life support?
Respirator. Let's vote.
A ventilator. Thank you. A ventilator is a very neutral, accurate, descriptive term that vents air in and out of whatever you attach it to. If you call that machine a life support machine, that journalists love to call a life support, and doctors also call it a life support machine, what are you implying? You're implying that the person is alive. Now, according to modern medicine, a person who's brain dead is actually dead. So to call it a life support machine, you're misleading the family into thinking the patient's alive. In addition to which, I could attach a football to a ventilator and vent air in and out of the football, and no one in the local newspaper would report that the football was on life support. If we got bored tonight, when this was over, and just then I bought you guys a keg of beer just for fun, and we went to a local cemetery just for kicks, and we dug up a freshly buried corpse that they buried this morning, just for fun, and we attached it to a ventilator. When they arrested us tomorrow morning, would the Jerusalem Post report that a bunch of sickos from this shul, led by Robby Berman, maybe the Jerusalem Post would Haaretz report that a bunch of sickos had attached a corpse to a life support machine? Would that make any sense to anyone? No, you would say a bunch of sickos attach a corpse to a ventilator. If you use the term life support, you're influencing the family not to donate organs because you are implying the loved one is alive. That's inappropriate to do, and you shouldn't do it. Journalists love to use it because it's very dramatic and it sells a lot of newspapers. Doctors also love the term respirator. Why do doctors love the term respirator? You know why? Because respirator implies that there's respiration, which is a biological function. There's just one problem. The person is not doing any respiration. The definition of respiration is, anyone know? It's not breathing, it is autonomous breathing. How much autonomous breathing is a person doing who is brain dead? 0.0%. Brain death means that your brain stem is not working, you can't breathe on your own, there's no respiration going on. You're using the laws of physics. Tonight I had an amazing dinner, I must say. And where is it? I had an amazing dinner at the Schachters. I really enjoyed it. And we had Soda Stream. We had Soda Stream. No, I mean, that wasn't the amazing part. The food, those non-kosher hot dogs, what are they called? They look not kosher. They look not kosher, for sure. They were amazing. But you serve Soda Stream. And Soda Stream, if anyone here, I forget what it's called in physics. I think it's called, believe it or not, Franck's Law. Uses a concept where they use pressure to force gas into a liquid. So when you want to make soda, when you want to make seltzer, they use Franck's Law to put pressurized air in. And that's what a ventilator does. It forces pressurized air into the blood. So a respirator, to call it a respirator implies there's respiration when there's no respiration going on. The ventilator is the best and most accurate and most neutral term that will not influence a family one way or the other. Why do doctors not like to call it a ventilator? My theory is because they don't want to sound like a mechanic. They went to 7 years of medical school, they want to sound like they're medicinal, they call it a respirator, they call it life support, very dramatic, they're heroes. But to call it a ventilator because there's vents in the room right now, it sounds like you're a mechanic, so people stay away from the word ventilator, but that's what they should use. How does a person become brain dead? Well, I like to do extreme sports. I've climbed Kilimanjaro, I've jumped out of airplanes, I went to Pamplona and I ran with the bulls. I didn't really run with the bulls, I ran from the bulls because I'm not that brave. But once I went biking, mountain biking in Italy, in Tuscany, and I fell down this very steep decline. And I was rushed to the hospital and my arm became extremely swollen. And it was swollen for about 3 days and then the swelling went down. And what was interesting about it was the swelling became so powerful that the pressure blocked out the blood flow to my hand, and these 2 fingers started to turn black, given the lack of blood flow. And I don't speak Italian, so the translator in the hospital that they assigned to me was translating between the surgeon and myself, and the surgeon said to the translator, please tell Mr. Berman that if the blackness on his fingers goes all the way down, he said, possibile amputata. And I said to the translator, please do not translate what the doctor just said. I don't want to hear that word. I'm just going to pretend it's lunchtime, the doctor's hungry, he's not sure what he wants to eat. I'm going to think the doctor said he's thinking about contemplating possibly potatoes. You know, but no, don't tell me possible amputation, because I don't want to hear that. So they explained, no, if you don't get blood flow, the fingers will die, we need to amputate them. So I sat there massaging, pushing, pressure, doing everything I could. They were going to cut open my arm to relieve the pressure. I think it's called compartmental, whatever it's called, syndrome. But anyway, thank God I got the blood flow, and the full swelling went down after 3 days. What is the problem if you are stupid enough to go into the back seat of a car and you don't put on the seatbelt in the back seat of a car, and someone hits the back of your car, and as we got into an accident today, so last night I was mugged, and this afternoon I was in, and this morning someone didn't get my joke, and then this afternoon we got into a car accident. So I'm having a wonderful time in Switzerland, and I thank you for hosting me. What happens if you're silly enough not to put on a seatbelt in the back seat of your car, and someone else is driving, you're in the back seat, someone hits you, and you hit your head? Your brain, which underwent this trauma, will want to swell. So what's the big deal? In a few days, like my arm, the swelling went down. In a few days, your swelling will go down in your brain. Does anyone see a problem with that scenario?
Yeah.
Well, you can still have blood supply. The brain will swell. What's the problem with the brain swelling?
Bones don't let it swell.
Right. Yes. The brain wants to swell, but it'll swell to a point where it can't swell anymore. And then the ICP, the intracranial pressure, will grow. And once that gets so large, you know who wins an arm wrestle? Usually the stronger person. So everyone now has a BP, a blood pressure. Everyone here has a different blood pressure because everyone's here heart has a different strength. I could have put a cuff around your arm and measure how strong your heart is. So if your heart is trying to create a certain amount of pressure to pump oxygenated blood to your brain, and all of a sudden it encounters an area, the cranial pressure, which is stronger, larger, bigger than the pressure of your heartbeat, what will happen to the blood flow? The heart will try to pump blood. The heart, let's say, has a pressure of 50x, and it encounters a pressure of 51x. What will happen to the blood flow? It stops or goes back down. And what happens to your brain after 4 minutes of no oxygen?
Dead.
Not totally dead. Irreversible brain damage begins. And what happens after an extensive period of time where your brain doesn't get oxygen? It undergoes a horrific biological process called lysis. If anyone here is kind of squeamish, this is a time to put your fingers in your ear. That means the brain cells begin to melt. People who are brain dead, and they're on a ventilator for an extended period of time, the brain begins to ooze out of the nose of the patient, down the spinal canal, and if their eardrums are perforated, outside their ears. Sorry, it's gross, but that's the situation. How many people do you think, when they die, become brain dead? I asked this question in North Carolina to the American Hebrew Academy. AHA, it's called. It's a Jewish prep school. 400 students. And I gave them the answer. The answer is, out of all the people that die in the world, only 0.0024% become brain dead. And a young, brave girl in 10th grade raised her hand, stood up, and said, "Mr. Berman, you are wrong." I said, "Wow." I said, "First of all, it's very impressive that you're getting up in front of the whole school and telling me that I'm wrong, but I've done my homework. Why do you think I'm wrong?" She said, "It's not true what you said." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, I know my stats. Only 0.0024% of all deaths end in brain death." She said, "You're wrong." I said, "What do you mean I'm wrong?" She said, "You don't mean to tell me that they bury people in the grave with working brains, do you?" Clearly, everyone is brain dead. And she made me realize that I was wrong. She is right. All of us, including the medical establishment, including physicians, we are wrong when we talk about brain death. What we mean to say when we talk about brain death is we mean a body with a dead brain and a beating heart. That is a unique situation that only happens 0.0024% of the time. Okay, so the ICP has grown, it's blocked out the blood flow. You're on the ventilator. Now, do they put you on the ventilator after you're brain dead? No. They put you on the ventilator because you came in unconscious, they're trying to help you breathe. They put you on the vent, and after you're on the vent and the ventilator is breathing 30% for you, 40% for you, 50% for you, all of a sudden your brain dies, you're not breathing on your own. Now the ventilator is breathing 100% of the time for you. How long can your heart continue to beat for? Most people think forever. Most people think very long. Most people would be incorrect. The average amount of time that a person who's on a ventilator, whose brain is dead, his heart continues to beat, is 3 days. That's the average amount of time. Some people could be on the ventilator for 3 months. Some people could be on the ventilator for 3 hours. But a person whose brain is dead, typically, after 3 days, the heart stops beating. And now we have the perfect halachic storm. We have a person whose brain is dead, and the heart beats for 1, 2, 3 more days, and then the heart stops beating. So during this 3-day period, is the person halachically alive or dead? From a medical perspective, he's dead, and it's a great opportunity to remove all the beautiful organs that are not impacted at all. But according to halacha, there are some rabbis who think that a beating heart's a sign of human life. If there's such a debate, why don't we just take out the organs after day 3, when the heart stops beating?
Because they deteriorate.
What?
The organs deteriorate.
Why do the organs deteriorate?
Because
The heart stops beating, and the heart stops supplying oxygenated blood to all the organs, and now the organs suffer from oxygen deprivation. Now they don't have oxygen. Now they're all damaged. I will give you a little bit of inside information. The truth is, once the heart stops beating, you do have 40 minutes, if you move quickly, to remove the kidneys and the liver, even though the heart stopped beating. But we almost never do it. Do you know why? Because how do we know when the heart's going to stop beating? The heart can stop beating after 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks. And who takes out organs in the hospital? The janitor? No. The thoracic surgeon? No. The cardiac surgeon? No. Kidney surgeon? No. A specialist, a transplant surgeon. And if the person dies, if the person's heart stops beating at 7 o'clock at night, where is the transplant surgeon? The transplant surgeon's probably home having dinner with her husband. Did you like that? Anyone? Someone? No one? Boy, I thought this community was alive. I thought this was the dominion that was much more advanced and liberal and nothing. No response. Okay, so for those of you who didn't get it, I met the surgeon, a woman.
Yeah.
They still didn't get it. Okay.
Why should we laugh?
Right, that's right. Why should he even be surprised? Exactly. Why? That's right.
Our brain is slow but still alive.
Okay. So, now we have this perfect halachic storm. So what does halacha say about it? I'm going to hold it up here. I'll give it out to you afterwards. I'd like to hold on to it so I can control where your attention is. If I hand it out, then people start reading ahead. I'll look at the footnotes. So I'm going to hold on to it. I have the sources here. So what I want to do with you is share with you 2 halachic sources that have to do with, that the rabbis tend to do on brain death. Actually, there's a third one I'll do outside, and that is, back in the early 1990s, there was a pregnant woman who got into a car accident, and she still had 3 months to go before her due date, and she was diagnosed. They discovered that she was brain dead, and that the ventilator was breathing for her 100%. So her husband paid about $180,000 to continue to give her hormones and electrolytes, and to make sure that they would keep her body functioning, that it wouldn't stop after 3 days, for as long as they could keep her body functioning as an incubator. And they kept her body functioning like that for about 2 months. It was at 63 days. And then they did a C-section, took out the baby girl, and then turned off the ventilator and buried the woman's body. Now this was a problem, because there's the Gemara in Erchin that says the following: when the Malach HaMavet, when the angel of death comes to kill someone, when it comes to kill a pregnant woman, the Gemara says the baby always dies first, and then the woman gets killed by the angel of death. And this caused a problem, because at that time, the Rabbanim in Jerusalem said, how can you tell me brain death is death if there was a woman whose brain was dead, and she was pregnant, but her baby stayed alive? The Gemara clearly says that whenever the angel of death comes to kill a pregnant woman, the baby dies first, and then the mother. So the doctors, Rav Avram Steinberg, who was here 2 months ago, he tried to explain, he was the one in charge of this whole project, he tried to explain to the rabbis that, yes, in a normal situation, when the Gemara was written down 1,600 years ago, when a woman is ill, a pregnant woman is ill, when she's getting sicker and sicker, and she's on the verge of death, yes, the baby, the fetus, will die first, and then she'll die first. But in a hospital, with an artificial situation, where a pregnant woman is on a ventilator, artificially giving her oxygen, then you can artificially keep the baby alive while the woman dies. So they said to the Rabbanim, we'll do an experiment. We'll prove to you that this is true. How? There's a Mishnah on Ohalot, which we're going to get to in a second, that says that whenever a person is decapitated, they're dead. Decapitation is always death. So this is what we'll do. We'll take a woman who's pregnant, and we'll cut off her head. But we'll keep her ventilated. We'll sew the arteries and veins together to make sure there's no blood loss. We'll keep her ventilated. We'll artificially give her oxygen. And after we cut off her head and we know the woman is dead, an hour later we'll take out the fetus and show the baby can still be alive. The rabbi said, great!
What?
Well, you know, it was a limited, it was a reserved great. He said, great, let's do it, but let's not use a pregnant woman, let's use a sheep.
Okay.
So they did what's called a sheep experiment. And there's a video of this. They haven't released it to the public because they're afraid of animal rights activists like PETA. I have a copy of the video. I've seen the video. They take a pregnant sheep and they sew the arteries and veins together, and then they ventilate the sheep. But they obviously give it medication to knock it out, and then they saw off the head of the sheep, and they keep the heart pumping for another hour, and then they remove the fetus, or what do you call it, baby sheep? I don't know. I'm from Woodmere, Long Island,
Kid?
New York, where I'm from. Tomatoes grow in aisle 5. I don't know what a sheep is. What's a baby sheep called? A lamb? Is it a lamb? I think it's, no, yeah. So they took the lamb out of the sheep. What's a female sheep? A ewe? Something like that. Who knows? We don't know these things. Anyway, so they proved that it could be done. They proved that you could actually kill someone, but yet still keep the fetus alive. Okay. So let's get to the two sources which talk about this issue. One is a Mishnah in Ohalot. The Mishnah in Ohalot is a fascinating Mishnah. First of all, I have to explain something to you. Human bodies are a very interesting thing. Animals and human beings can move after they are dead. Anyone familiar with this?
Yeah.
So animals can move after they're dead. If you ever see a shechita done on a chicken, the chicken still runs. I've seen that. I was once camping with some friends in the wilderness out in America, and there was a snake, unfortunately, that we encountered, and I succeeded in grabbing the snake and killing the snake, but even though I killed the snake and beheaded the snake tail still began to thrash around and try to attack us in a neurological reaction. Human beings can also move. I once went to lecture. What was that rabbi's name from the Midwest? Memphis, Tennessee. What was his name? No, from Memphis, Tennessee, Rabbi Grossman. So I once went to lecture Rabbi Grossman's shul about brain death and organ donation. And when it was over, a woman came up to me and said, I want to meet you for a cup of coffee in Starbucks. I got a story for you. I said, great, what's the story? So we went to Starbucks, and she told me that she's a choser b'tshuva. She was a young woman. She was like 25 years old. She was a choser b'tshuva, newly returned to Judaism. And she lived in a small village, small town, like 2 hours away from Memphis, in the middle of Yemensville, nowhere. And she said that because it was such a small community, they needed someone to be on the Chevra Kadisha to wash women's, do tahara for the women's bodies. So usually when you do tahara, you do it with another person. So she got a call at 8 o'clock at night from the rabbi of the shul. He said this 95-year-old woman of the shul had died. Her body is in the basement of the shul. They got to do tahara. The other woman is out of town. You're up at bat. He said, Rabbi, I've never done this before alone. And he said, well, we're davening Gemara upstairs. The men can't do it. You got to come in. So she said, okay. So she comes into the shul. Now, I forgot to mention this to you. In the human body, there's something called the Lazarus reflex. That means if you touch a dead body's back up until about 24 hours after they're dead, and you activate this nerve, the dead body's hands can reach out like that. So you could be like this, a dead body, you touch the person's back, and after like 30 seconds or a minute, all of a sudden the hands come out like that. It's a very scary thing. If you go on YouTube, you can see it. It makes for a great viewing before you go to bed. Great. So she told me that, and no one had told this young poor woman about the Lazarus reflex. So she goes to the shul, the men are davening Marav. She goes downstairs, her first time alone with a dead body. She hears the prayers of Marav wafting through the floorboards. It's poorly lit in the basement of the shul. She starts to wash the body and do tahara, and she washes this woman's back. And all of a sudden, when she takes her hand out from behind the woman's back, this naked 95-year-old woman starts to go like this. And she told me that she freaked out. She threw down the sponge. She was screaming. She ran up the stairs with her gloves still on. She kicked open the door to the shul. The men were having the Amida. She did like 10 foot around the bima screaming, "She's alive! She's alive!" The Lazarus reflex is the number one cause of heart attacks among Chevra Kadisha workers in America. A little known fact. Now, no one thought that she was alive. Clearly, movement does not mean life. So this Mishnah that was written down in what century? What century were the Mishnayos written down?
Second century.
Second century. Who redacted the Mishnayot? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, right? And he writes in there that a person is dead when the soul leaves the body. What is the problem with that practical piece of information? No one exactly knows when the soul has left the body. No one's ever gone on Shark Tank and said, "Mr. Cuban, I've got a great device. I want you to help me invest and raise money." You heard of a thermometer. You stick it in someone's mouth. You see if the guy has temperature. I have invented a soulometer. You stick it in the mouth. You see if there's a soul. No one has a soulometer. So the Mishnah is kind of useless with the opening line where Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, when the soul leaves the body, the person's dead. That doesn't really help you. At the end, the Mishnah says, you know what? I'm going to give you a little bigger hint. I will tell you a case of death that's so traumatic, so severe, we know for sure, 100%, that if a person dies in this way, the soul has clearly left the body, and the Mishnah says, Hutaz rosho, la'rofet rosho. Decapitation is death. That's what the Mishnah says. No matter what happens, the Mishnah says, even if the chicken still runs, that chicken is dead. By the way, this is also modern medicine. The organism is dead if the organism is decapitated. No matter what else happens to the body. So the chicken is dead, the snake is dead, the lizard is dead, the human being is dead. And the Mishnah again can be summarized in 3 words. Decapitation is death. So now what I want to do is take the room and divide it into 2 parts. Because I want to show you why there's a debate among the rabbis whether or not a person who's brain dead is really dead or not. Some people use this Mishnah to declare a brain dead patient dead, and some people say it's not. So you're Dr. Gellis, is that your name? Yaakov. So Yaakov, in this group here, you are a group of scholars 1. You're a group of scholars A. You represent Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Amar, Rav Ovadia Yosef, Chief Rabbin of Israel, Razam Mechame Goldberg, and your name is? Itamar. You're group B. You represent Rav Shach, Rav Yashiv.
He's not happy.
No. See, I'm not on camera. Rabbi Bly, Rabbi Willig, Rabbi Schachter. Okay. So now we have 2 groups. I invite you into the hospital. I want you to look at this patient who's brain dead. His heart, the reason why his heart's still beating is because he's getting oxygen from a machine. What's that machine called? Ventilator. It's not called a respirator. It's not called a life support machine. Very good. And the heart will beat for how many more days? 3 more days. It could be 3 hours. It could be 3 months. But the average is about 3 days, right? And I want to ask your opinion. Do you think this person is dead according to Allah or not? So this group here, Yaakov's group here, can you please explain to me, based on a Mishnah written down 1,800 years ago that says 3 words, decapitation is death, explain to me why you can declare this person to be dead according to Allah. He's not decapitated, he's just brain dead. His whole brain is dead, but he's not decapitated. Why could you declare him halachically to be dead based on a Mishnah that talks about decapitation? Say it again? Essentially, he is decapitated. That's correct. Essentially, he is decapitated. In other words, a person whose brain is dead, it's as if he is decapitated. Because what do we care about in a person's head? When their beautiful nose? Oh my God, he's missing a beautiful nose, therefore he must be. No. His ear, his beautiful earlobes? No. We care about what's in his head, the brain. Okay. This group here, please do not be typical Israelis. Do not argue with Yaakov's group until you really understand what it is they said. Because Israelis just like to yell and argue and they have no idea what the other person said. So before we argue, let's first, who here wants to repeat what this team said? What was the reason why they declare a person who's brain dead to be dead according to halacha?
No air.
What was that?
No air in the brain, so that's like decapitation.
Because it's similar to decapitation. Okay, now focus like a laser beam on what was said here and knock it down. Sarah said, a person who's brain dead, it's as if they are decapitated, and you say, as if. And he's not. What's your name?
David.
What?
David.
David. I'm going to channel David. I'm going to channel David just for a second. I'm David. David's going like this. Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. Why did you do that, Sarah? I saw what you did. I'm just channeling David right now. Sarah, you walked into the hospital, and the first thing you did was you whipped out your finger, your thumb, and you started going like this. My name is Sarah, and I want to show how smart I am, and I see a guy whose brain is dead, and therefore for me it's as if he is. I want to extrapolate and say, do a drasha that he is, as if he is decapitated. David says, put your thumb away. David, although he might not look like it, David is a chassid. He has his payas behind his ears, and David is a chassid of Chief Justice Anthony Scalia, Zichrono Livracha, the Italian Chief Justice who passed away. He was a literalist. He wanted to see what was written in the text. And what was written in the text? Decapitation. Sorry, you don't have decapitation. So you're trying to extrapolate, and he's saying, I'm taking a literal reading. And that's why there's a machloket among the rabbis on this mission of whether or not you could use it. Of course, if you look at the Rambam, which you see that in my commentary here, the Rambam says, all we care about is the brain. So that would seem to support this position here. We all understand how now there's one source. We have access to, well, everyone has access to the same source, but they understand it in different ways. Okay. Now let's take another source, which is a much more interesting source. It's the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Hey, Pei Hey Amar Aleph, 85, folio A, where it says the following. You're walking on Shabbat in Zurich, and you see a friend of yours on Shabbat across the street. And there's some construction going on. And there's some pigumim, those things by the building, what are they called?
Scaffolding.
Scaffolding. And the scaffolding collapses on top of the person, your friend. Now, you're not allowed to dig on Shabbat, but can you go dig them out?
Yes.
Why not? Why can you? Because piko nefesh. Okay, great. So what happens if you dig him out, you uncover his head, and he's unconscious, unresponsive, and his tongue is hanging out, and he looks dead? Well, if he's not dead, you need to continue digging. But if he is dead, you have to stop digging because it's Shabbos, right? So what do?
So we could continue.
So one rabbi says, well, just take a feather, put it by his nose, and see if he's breathing. If he's breathing, then he's still living, you take him out. Yesh Omrim, there's another opinion, a minority opinion that says, wait a minute. You don't check his nose, you check his heart. And you want to see if his heart's beating. So one rabbi cares about the nose and the breathing, one cares about the heart beating. Well, this is our exact machloket here. Brain death means a guy who can't breathe, but the heart's beating. If you hold by the first opinion that says we care about the breathing, a person who's brain dead can't breathe, therefore he must be dead. But if you hold by the second rabbi, you hold by the heartbeat, that you care about the heartbeat, that he's still alive. The Gemara continues and makes a bizarre association. The Gemara says, oh wow, this is a fascinating debate. This reminds me of another debate somewhere else, another sugi in the Gemara, that says, ask the question, when a fetus is formed inside the womb of the mother, what part of the body of the fetus forms first? One opinion says the head forms first, and the other opinion says the navel forms first. Does anyone see a problem with this association? The Gemara free flows and has an association. We're having a debate about when is a person dead. Check the nose and check the heartbeat. So that reminds me of another debate about a fetus. First of all, this is talking about the end of life. This is talking about the beginning of life. There's no connection there. Second of all, this is talking about the nose and the heart, and this is talking about the head and the belly button. Doesn't seem to make any sense at all. Yeah?
Could depend when life starts.
But yeah, but one is when life starts, one is when life ends. But there's those are two separate questions.
Maybe it's the part where the neshama comes in.
Doesn't mention neshama. Before I give you the answer to this problem, and it is a serious problem, let me just finish with the end of the Gemara. The Gemara at the end of the day says, we don't care about the heartbeat. We care about the breathing. If a person can't breathe, the person is dead. That's where the Gemara paskins, that's where the Rambam paskins, that's where the Shulchan Aruch paskins. He's dead. And therefore, you would think, if that's true, that all we care about is the breathing, then everyone should agree that a person who's brain dead is halachically dead and you should donate their organs. Why is it there are still some rabbis who care about a beating heart? You know, a heart, I hate to be so crude, but a heart is just a biological pump. I once had, thank God, as the head of the Halachic Organ Donor Society, I've had the opportunity to save hundreds of lives around the world. And in every single time that I've convinced a family to donate organs, they always call me and tell me that they thank me. They say, our brother died on this Black Thursday, and even though it's a dark, black day for us, there are 8 shining stars of light that these strangers whose lives we saved. I never, ever, ever had anyone ever tell me they were sorry they did it, except once. There was a woman in New Jersey, a 40-year-old woman, who was madly in love with her husband. And one morning, on a Shabbat morning, instead of going to shul, her husband decided to go jogging. He went jogging in New Jersey, he got hit by a car. He was rushed to the hospital, became brain dead, she didn't know what to do. They called me up on Shabbat, I happened to be in New York, went to the hospital, spoke with the woman, convinced her, she donated his organs and saved 8 lives. 6 months later, she called me up and told me she was sorry that she listened to me. She's sorry that she did. I said, why? You saved 8 lives. You know why she was sorry? Because she found out from the transplant community. She had no children, just her and her husband. They were madly in love with each other. They had no one else but each other. She found out from the transplant community that her husband's heart was transplanted into a 30-year-old single woman's body. And she felt that this single woman had her husband's heart. So I said, look, I also love poetry, I also love lyrics, I also love symbolism, but the bottom line is your husband's heart is just a biological pump. If your husband had heart disease and they gave him a mechanical heart, you wouldn't tell me that your husband doesn't love you anymore because his heart's out the window, right? So, okay, so we have this Gemara that says basically we only care about the breathing. So how is it possible then there are still some major significant rabbis that say a beating heart is still significant? The answer is because in the days that the Gemara was written, 1,600 years ago, if a person couldn't breathe, their heart stopped beating a minute later. Right? They're very much connected. If your heart doesn't pump blood to your brain won't breathe, so your breathing will stop. If you don't breathe, you won't get oxygen, your heart will stop. They're very much interconnected. Only since 1952, when the ventilator became popularized and stabilized and sophisticated, can they actually separate this process where you do not breathe, but your heart can continue to beat. So those in this camp that say, oh, brain death is not death, it's because they believe that when the Gemara was written, they believed everything shut down at the same time. Okay. Let's go back to this question. Let me repeat the question. We have a Gemara that says, we have a debate between the nose and the heart. When is a person dead? And the Gemara says, oh, that reminds me of another debate between when a fetus is formed. Is it the head or the navel? You know what the navel is? The belly button? Okay. This Gemara makes a lot more sense if you take a look at manuscripts. When was the printing press invented?
15th century.
15th century. When was the first Gemara printed?
1521.
I think 23, but maybe you're right. 1521?
I what I saw to be in New York in December, and
Yeah.
there was an auction of many exemplars of the first Blomberg edition.
The Bomberg was 21? I thought it was 23.
21, 22.
Maybe they're trying to get some more money out of you by saying it was 21.
And
Jews in New York, you can't trust Jews in New York.
It depends if it's the Hebrew date or
Right, the Hebrew, okay.
So
Anyway, what would happen? So if the Gemara was printed in the 1520s, we shall say, if the Gemara was printed in the 1520s, how did people learn Gemara before the 1520s? They learned from manuscripts. So what happens if, let's say, it's the year's 1153, and you're learning Daf Yomi in the morning by candlelight, and you spill your decaf venti cappuccino with whipped cream all over your manuscript? What do you besides cry over the lost money? What do you do with the manuscript? You have to get a new one. So you go to a scribe and you say, could you please write me a new one? And how does a scribe write a new manuscript of a Gemara? He, by candlelight, looks and goes like this, and goes like this, and goes like this, and human beings are known to what? To make mistakes, and mistakes creep in, and that's why we have various versions of the Gemara. Well, as it turns out, our sugya in Gemara Yuma, Pehem and Aleph, has 14 versions that are still extant today in the great libraries of Russia, England, Germany, New York, Israel, and Italy. 14 versions of our sugya. 11 out of the 14 versions of our sugya do not say that the debate about what to check when a person dies is between the nose and the heart. You know what it says the debate is? One rabbi says if you dig out the rubble and you find your friend, one rabbi says yes, you check his nose for breathing, and the other rabbi says you check his belly button. What are you checking his belly button for? Lint? Dirt? Right? Because if there's dirt inside the belly button, you can't be alive. No self-respecting Jew would walk around. You can't be alive if there's lint in the belly. No, what are they checking the belly button for? What are you looking at the navel for?
If he has a hernia.
If he has a hernia. What are you looking at the belly button for? Breathing. How do you check breathing at the belly button? You see if it goes up and down. Up and down. Well, wait a minute. I thought the first guy said we want to check the nose for breathing. It seems that both opinions only cared about breathing. It was not a debate about the essence of when is a person dead. It was a diagnostic debate. It was before the invention of stethoscopes. How are they supposed to know if a person's breathing? One says, look at his nose, put a feather by his nose. The other person says, look at the belly. Look at the belly, goes up or down. And now it makes much more sense for the Gemara to say, oh, this debate about the nose and the belly button reminds me of the debate about the beginning of the formation of a fetus. Is it the head or the belly button? At least you have the same body part. So no one mentions heart. So where do we get heart from? Well, we have this mistaken version of the Gemara that was adopted by Rashi. It's not in the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi says belly button. It's not in the Rosh or the Rif. They say belly button. It's not in the Rambam. He says belly button. Everyone says belly button. We have one seemingly minority mistaken opinion, mistaken version which said heart. And we have the Khatam Sofer. The Khatam Sofer said, in a very long tshuva, one of the longest tshuvas is the Khatam Sofer, that, of course a person's dead if he stopped breathing and his heart stopped beating. So it seems, according to the Khatam Sofer, you needed both. But later on in the same tshuva, he quotes the Gemara and he says, all you need is for the person to stop breathing. Well, which is it? Why is the Khatam Sofer confused? Anyone know why? Because during that period, the Duke of Mecklenburg in Germany said, because we're not sure when people die, and there were some stories that people had woken up in coffins, and that's why they installed ropes in coffins. So if a person wakes up in a coffin, he could pull on the rope and ring a bell, and you say by the bell, the person comes and digs you out. So in order to prevent that from happening, they said, you know what, let's take all the bodies and put them in a room for 3 days. And if the person doesn't wake up after 3 days, then we know they're dead and we can bury them. And we know that according to the Torah, we have to bury a person as soon as possible. So the Khatam Sofer was saying, what do you mean you don't know if a person is dead? He was saying in a rhetorical, flourishing sense, if the guy can't breathe and his heart has stopped beating, clearly he's dead. He wasn't saying, I have given you a halach psak that you need the breathing to stop and the heart to stop. He was saying in a flourishing literary sense, of course we know when people are dead. And he goes on later in the psak, in the shut, to say that, quote the Gemara, that if a person stops breathing, clearly he's dead. Okay, that's basically the two sources. I want to now open up the floors to any questions you might have.
But
Yes.
you did not explain why the heart is left and how did they call the belly button in the Gemara?
The tabor, the navel.
Alors there is no analogy. Where is the origin of the mistake?
I don't want to get into it now. There is another sugya which would bring. It makes sense why the Sofer made that mistake. I don't want to get into it now, but there's a reason for that, why they brought in the heart. But as I said, 11 out of the 14 manuscripts of the Gemara, before the printing press was created, manuscripts that we have show that the original version seems to be between the nose and the belly button, and that would also make sense because the continuation of the sugya says, it reminds me of another debate between the head and the belly button. Yes?
It's not a question, it's just a comment. When my father was very sick in Tel Hashomer Hospital, there was a rabbi going on who had this possibility to tell that the neshama went out, even when my father recovered and had an operation later, but I was very surprised that they told me this rabbi is there for years and everything he tells us is true.
Right.
You
Right.
believe
It's
in
very unfortunate that there are rabbis out there they call this type of narishkeit. I don't know if anyone here watched the news last night, the Israeli news on Channel 2, Channel 12, that a rabbi, it was an expose, and rabbi, his name is Berland. Anyone hear of Berland?
Oh, a
He's-
sect.
Yeah, he's the head of a Breslover thing.
He's in prison.
He sat in prison for 6 months for inappropriate sexual behavior with women that he was counseling. He's like 75 years old in a wheelchair, and he sat in prison for 6 months. He now is caught. What does he do now? When a patient is brain dead, he goes to the hospital with like 50 of his avrechem, 50 of his students, and he says to the family, "Give me 20,000 shekel, and I will make a blessing," and he'll wake up.
What?
He was in yesterday's news, and it's also tonight. They're doing the second part of the series of this expose on the rabbi. What I find ironic about the whole story of this quote-unquote rabbi is that he's in a wheelchair. Clearly his blessings don't work to get him out of a wheelchair, but wake someone up out of brain death, which no one's ever done. How many people, if you Google person wakes up from brain death, you will find thousands of hits. You know what the problem is with these results?
They weren't actually brain dead.
None of these people who go on television or get interviewed in the newspaper are ever interviewed with their physician. In other words, there are so many stories about people waking up from brain death, and no one's ever woken up from brain death. I told you it's impossible to wake up from brain death because when your brain dies, it begins to melt. It begins to ooze out of your nose and ears, and that goes down your spinal canal. It's impossible. And what people do is they get on television, and people want to hear a dramatic story. I was brain dead, and the doctors were coming after me for my organs. They came with a knife, a fork, and a spoon, and they were about to jump on me, and hallelujah, praise the Lord, I woke up, and it was a miracle. We prayed for a miracle. Have you heard of the case of Avi Cohen? Avi Cohen was a famous soccer player. He played for Manchester United, an Israeli guy. Went back to Israel, and he was in a motorcycle accident. He was declared brain dead. His wife and son went on television, held up his ID card, his Israeli organ donor card, and said, "We're going to donate his organs." They called 8 people to the hospital to prep them for the surgery to save their lives. And what happened? 2 rabbis ran to the hospital and said, "Don't donate Avi's organs. We're going to go to the Koisel. I'm going to pray for Avi to wake up." As I told you, no one in the history of the world has ever woken up from brain death. But his wife, understandably, was under great emotional trauma, and 2 rabbis with long flowing beards tell you they're going to pray for him, and they promised her he's going to wake up. I also, if I was in that situation, I probably would have done the same thing. So she didn't donate his organs. 3 days later, his heart stopped beating, and they buried Avi Cohen. And 5 out of those 8 people who were called to the hospital to get the transplant, they died a little later on because there's not enough organ donation in Israel. This is the Israeli organ donor card, and this is the Halachic organ donor card. In Israel, we offer this card. Outside of Israel, we offer this card. There's another terrible case in Tel Aviv, in Tel Shomer, where a 72-year-old woman was brain dead, and a 52-year-old Israeli man needed a lung transplant, and they had the same blood type. They asked the family if they would, a very religious family, a black hat family, if they would donate her lungs and save this Israeli man. And they said, "We have to ask our rabbi, Rabbi Kanevsky." They went to Rabbi Kanevsky, and he said, "No, I don't accept brain death as death. Beating heart is a sign of human life." That was his understanding of the sugyas. So the woman's heart stopped beating 3 days later, and they buried her. And the man, the Israeli man, he died about 3 weeks later because there was not enough organ donation in Israel. Now, that is a tragedy, but that's not a chil Hashem. Because I think a family has a right to disagree with Robby Berman and to disagree with other rebbeim and say, "I don't want to kill my congregant, and I think he or she is alive." Where was the chil Hashem? A week later, an investigative journalist from Yediot Ochronot had revealed, it was leaked to her, I know who leaked it to her, that this 72-year-old woman, 3 years prior, was dying of liver failure. And they asked Israel Transplant to get her a liver from a brain-dead patient, and they did. So she took a liver from a brain-dead patient when she needed it. For that, it was okay to say, "Okay, the person's dead, give me his liver," but she refused to donate it, or her family refused to donate it. Former Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. This is going on YouTube, so I got to be very careful how I say here. Former Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs and the London Beth Din came out with a ruling about 10 years ago that said that a person who's brain dead is not dead according to halacha, and therefore they forbid all the Jews of England from getting an organ donor card and from donating organs. But in the same psak, they said, if a Jew in England ever needs an organ, it's okay to take them from other people. And they were criticized by rabbis and doctors from around the world. Chief rabbi at Paris and all the rabbis of Paris came out with a similar ruling. Forbidden for Jews to donate organs, but if they ever need an organ, it's okay to take them from other people. This is an incredible Chilul Hashem. If you are not dead when you're a Jew, you're not dead when you're a non-Jew. If you can't donate organs when you're a Jew, then you shouldn't donate organs when you're a non-Jew, and you shouldn't be taking them. So what's the reason that they give? Well, they're being removed anyway, so why can't I benefit from them? Well, we know there's a halacha that says you can't buy stolen goods even after the goods were stolen. You never saw a guy go to the rabbi and say, Rabbi, the stereo is already on the back of the truck. It was already stolen. Can I buy it at a very cheap price? No. If it's gotten in an illegal fashion, in an immoral fashion, in an unhalachic fashion, you're not allowed to have anything to do with it. You don't want to promote that market. So have the courage of your conviction. If you want to say that brain death is not death, then have the courage of your conviction and say, I will not donate organs, but I also will not take organs. But unfortunately, there are some people out there who think, no, it's okay not to donate, but to take. And that's why Jews have a very bad name in the medical community. New York Times reported, by the way, how did I get into this? I was a journalist in Israel, and I found out that Israel had the lowest organ donor rate out of any country in the world. The New York Times reported in August, on the front page, that even though the average organ donor registration rate in America is 50%, the state in New York which has the lowest organ donor registration rate is New York State. And when the New York Times asked the government, the OPO, the Organ Procurement Organization, why does New York State have the worst organ donor registration rate out of every single state in America? They said it's very simple, because of the Jews and the Chinese. It is a terrible Chilul Hashem. And I don't think anyone here in this room has ever been exposed to a sugya or halachic topic that could actually save people's lives. You can learn all different halachas about Pesach and about Hanukkah. This is something that you can educate yourself about, become aware about it, discuss it with family and friends, have the conversation, and maybe save someone's life. I'll take like a couple more questions and then I'm going to wrap it up. Yeah.
Is the question, the definition of what is death with the brain death or not, is this the only problem, halachic problem for donation of organs, or are there also other things which have to be considered?
There are other issues, and we're going to discuss that on Shabbat morning at the shul here, right? In this shul here? Mm-hmm. If anyone is interested, by the way, as I'm answering questions, I just want to give you some, these are the source sheets if anyone wants them, and this is also a collection of Rav Moshe Feinstein's Piskei Tshuva. Rav Moshe Feinstein was against organ donation in the very beginning. He gave 4 halachic rulings. In the first one he said, you can't donate organs. Why? Because you're killing the donor. He didn't think then that brain death was death. And also he said you're killing the recipient, because when a person received a heart transplant, the first person lasted for, he was a Jew by the way, Warshatsky, South Africa, 1968, he lasted for only about 18 days. So he said you're killing both the donor and the recipient. Well, later on, if you read the flyer there, you can see he refined his understanding. Yes?
We started with the definition of brain death. And the question is, does every doctor accept his definition, or are there doctors who want to take out the organs and make it earlier brain death? That would be a halachic issue I can understand. And that is the fear I always heard, that doctors want the organs and define somebody brain dead before it really is.
Yes, so there is a fear among the public that they're afraid that if they have an organ donor card, and the doctors find out about the organ donor card, they might take out your organs before you are actually brain dead or dead. I always like to say brain dead with a beating heart. Right? I want to refine because of that girl from 10th grade. So a cadaver with a dead brain and a beating heart. Could that happen in a developing world? Possibly. Could it happen in Switzerland, in America, in Israel? I find that highly unlikely. I mean, don't forget, first of all, a doctor who would be doing that would be guilty of murder. A doctor who would be doing that would in danger of losing his license. A doctor who would be doing that would be in danger of going to prison. A doctor who would be doing that would have to collude with other people in the medical establishment. One doctor doesn't come in and take out organs. There's a whole team there, right? And most of all, you have to think about it. Why would a doctor do that? It's one thing if you want to say that a doctor has a right to direct organs, right? So if I'm a doctor and my mother needs a liver, let me just go ahead and kill this person and give my mom a liver. But the doctor doesn't get a right to direct the organs. It goes to a list. So why would a doctor jeopardize his license, jeopardize going to prison, actually murder a person to take out organs that he doesn't get any benefit from? It's crazy. Yes?
According to Halacha, who has the right to define according which Halacha, either brain death or heart death, you can be guided? Let's say if I go for brain death and I'm dying, and I write down I'm for brain death, can somebody else define after my death according to which way I want to be treated?
Great question. Unfortunately, the way it works is even if you sign our organ donor card, it says that we actually, on the back of the card of the Halachic Organ Donor Society, it says you can define brain death. You can define death as brain death with a beating heart, or brain death and heart death, which allows you just to donate skin and cornea. So that way you get the option, right? Because there is a legitimate halachic debate. But unfortunately, even though you have a card which is very explicit to your wishes, you cannot obligate the hospital to follow your wishes. So, which means, like with Avi Cohen, even though Avi Cohen had an organ donor card, his family did refuse to donate his organs.
I don't ask about the decision of the hospital. I ask about the halachic question. Has somebody after your death halachically the right to define about your will? It's not about how the hospital defines it. It's about the halacha, whether somebody else after your death has an additional right to define upon your will.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I mean, a person...
So is it halachically correct? If I say that I want to go for brain death, is it halachically correct that somebody else can then decide in another way? In a halachic way?
I think that would be halachically inappropriate, but you need to ask a rabbi, not a rabbi. Yeah.
If I follow all what you said, donc, most of the manuscript says that it is breath or belly button.
Right, breath or...
The big poskim from the Middle Ages follow this opinion.
No. The poskim from the Middle Ages give ambiguous tshuvas that could be understood in different ways.
But Rambam?
Yeah, the Rambam is unambiguous, is that right?
Alors,
And
Rabbi
the Shulchan Aruch,
Kanievsky
yes.
and Rabbi Jacobowitz, well, but the great halachists from today, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, I don't.
Rav Ovadia Yosef accepts brain death as a halachic death and says you should donate organs. Rav Amar says the same. Rav Moshe Feinstein the same. Rav Dava Feinstein the same. Rav Zalman Goldberg the same. But other rabbis, Rav Shach, Rav Yashiv, Rav Kanievsky,
and they are so influential in all the...
In the black hat world, yeah.
In the less black people.
I have to tell you something, and I don't mean to offend you. And I don't mean to offend anyone in this room, or myself. But we are irrelevant. Orthodox Jews are just a very, very small percentage of Jews at large. I'm not here to convince Orthodox Jews to become organ donors. I'm here to convince you, to show you that organ donation is allowed by halacha, so you go out and convince the secular Jew. Because it is the secular Jew who doesn't want to donate organs because they just think it's not allowed by Jewish law and we're not allowed to do it.
Not only.
I'm sorry?
Not only. It might be an emotional issue, might be that people just...
Well, if that would be true, that it's just an emotional issue, then everyone should have an emotional issue. But as we see, the Jews have the lowest organ donor registration rate in the world, both in Israel and in New York. So it's not just emotion, it's emotion connected to Judaism. Look, when I started the organization 17 years ago, I wanted to write an article for the Jerusalem Post. I was a freelance journalist. So I live on Emek Rephaim, in the Greek colony in Jerusalem, next to the German colony. And there was one non-kosher restaurant. It was McDonald's.
Long time ago.
And a long time ago. And the guy came out, and I took my trusty number 2 pencil from behind my ear and my notebook, and I said, I'm doing an article for the Jerusalem Post. I want to ask you a question. Do you have an organ donor card? Now, I'll never forget, it was summertime, and he had a tattoo of a snake on his shoulder, wrapped around his arm. And he was eating a huge, whopping cheeseburger. And I noticed he had a little piece of cheese and meat hanging on his lower right lip. And given my religious training, I went to Yeshiva University, I spent a year on the YU Smicha program, Basa V'Chalab, I had this incredible urge to lean over and separate the piece of cheese from the meat. But I figured I shouldn't be touching this guy's lip. I just met him. First buy him a drink and then touch his lip. So I said to the guy, do you have an organ donor card? And he said to me the following words, which I will never forget. He said, Ani kartis torem ivarim chas v'chalila za'asor lefi halacha. I said, dude, you're eating a cheeseburger. You have a tattoo on your shoulder. I said, you don't care about halacha. He says, you're right. He says, when it comes to my life, I don't want halacha to impinge upon my life. But when it comes to death, I want to be a little bit more frozen.
That's emotional.
It's emotional, connected to religion. He's saying that he thinks that Judaism is against it, and therefore he's very connected to that aspect of it. Yes?
I assume that you had a lot of discussion with people in favor or against organ donations. The basic problem I see is that the halacha is based on texts written 16, 17, 18, 100 years ago, in a time and in a frame where the science was, present science was not aware. And of course, the decision to consider breathing or heartbeat at this moment was the science at this time. In the meantime, of course, science evolved. And what I don't understand is that the halacha, which is based on this old text, does not evolve in function of the time. I am convinced that if the information would have been known 1800 years ago, the people who defined the halacha would have had another meaning. So what's your comment on this, and what is the comment of the people who are against organ donation?
What's your name? Sorry?
Jackie.
Jackie. So Jackie, great observation, Jackie. There are indeed people that say we shouldn't look to the Gemara to understand brain death because the Gemara didn't know about brain death. Brain death with a beating heart was only created in the 1950s when you could actually separate the breathing from the heartbeat. There are many comments in the Gemara that we know today are not true about cosmology, about science, about biology. The Gemara didn't know that women had that menstruation meant that they were getting rid of eggs. They didn't know, the Gemara didn't know that women ovulated. They didn't know that women participated at all. All they thought was that the sperm was a homunculus, a small little man, that grew inside the bloody environment of the uterus of the woman and grew into a human being, but it all came from the man. So yes, there are rabbis and there are people who say we should not be looking at the Gemara for the answer to this question. But there is obviously some people who like to study Pirkei Avos, and Bagbag says, Akol Nitzabo, Afochbo, everything's in the Torah, everything's there. So they say, no, it is there, you just have to look for it. So there is that opinion as well. And some people say you should not be looking. No, Rabbi Nathan Slifkin, the zoo rabbi, who I highly recommend you bring him as a speaker, fascinating speaker, was very controversial at one point. He's written a number of books. He has this museum in Beit Shemesh. He says you shouldn't be looking at the Gemara to find the answer to this question. Why are we trying to search? They didn't know, they didn't have brain death with beating heart. It was impossible to have 1,600 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. Yes. And wait, anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Because I want to give everyone a chance. Yeah.
What is the concept of kvod hamet? And
we'll talk about that Shabbat morning.
Nivula.
We'll talk about that Shabbat morning. Any other questions, rude remarks, comments, jokes?
If you say what you say, then you can shut the Gemara and put it away because you can tell it in many other fields.
Well, it depends what it depends what you're looking at the Gemara for. I mean, if you're looking at the Gemara to understand Look, I think when women get a donated egg, and they get fertilized with a donated egg, so the egg's not from the woman, clearly they didn't have that in the Gemara, because the Gemara didn't know about ovulating women. So they try to figure out whether or not the baby is Jewish or not, if it comes from a non-Jewish woman, based on hashtalot, when you mashtil, I forget how to say it, when you take a plant and you what's it called?
Grafting.
Grafting. When you do grafting. So they're trying every which way to find things in the Gemara, but clearly, as this gentleman said, as Yaakov said, with technology, as it goes on and on, we're going to find a lot more stuff that's just not in the Gemara. So what do you do with it? So some people say, on that issue, shut the Gemara. But not on other issues, which clearly, if you want to know how to observe Shabbat properly, or you want to know how to light the candles of Hanukkah properly, you have to look in the Gemara. Yeah.
There's just one counter-argument which I'd like to bring for saying shut the Gemara. I'm sure that when the lulav was picked on Erev Sukkot 1600 years ago, they didn't have magnifying glasses. And when the stem, we know that the kashrus, the yovesh, is when the middle blood, is together. We all know that. And at that time, I'm sure if you could see it by the eye and it was together, the lulav was kasher. Nowadays, they all stand with magnifying glasses, bigger and bigger and bigger. The more I can see, the lulav loses its kashrus, which was 1600 years ago, for sure kosher. So why is it there? Okay, we should. I mean, I'm not trying to be cynical, but when it's in the favor of being machmir, then it works, and mekel not.
In that spirit of talking about modern day technology, does anyone mind if I take a picture of the group? No. Anyone mind? Okay, everyone smile. Okay.
One more thing.
Yes.
Maybe a joke.
A joke?
Yeah.
This is Switzerland. We do not allow.
He's Israeli.
Oh, you're Israeli. Okay. Yalla.
It's from Israel. So when the late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon,
we don't what?
Ariel Sharon, when he was in hospital with ventilator.
Ventilator, not a respirator. Who said respirator? Ventilator.
So they wanted to.
Was he brain dead? Anyone? He was? Really? How do you know he was brain dead? How do you know he wasn't brain dead? How do you know he wasn't brain dead? How long was he on the ventilator for? Like 8 years, I think. Very rare for someone to be years on the ventilator when you're brain dead.
Yeah, so he was not there. So at that time, they wanted to issue a new money note on his name.
Yeah.
17 shekel. You know why? Kimat
Chai. Okay. On that bad joke note, any other questions? Okay, so I just want to leave you with one thought, everyone. And the thought is the following. I think everyone here knows that if, God forbid, your son or your daughter needed an organ that could only come from a brain-dead, heart-beating cadaver, you would hope the family would donate the organs. So you know you would take an organ if you needed one. So think about other people that also need one. And I ask everyone here, when you go home tonight, just send a text or WhatsApp or an email or a Facebook message to your family. Say, what are your thoughts about organ donation? And have you heard of the Halachic Organ Donor Society? And just tell them that you heard a fantastic, dynamic speaker, and they should come to Shul Shabbat morning to hear more about it. Thank you very much. And